There is a daughter. She has a name. She has a face. She has a family of her own now. And the woman who gave birth to her has never once, in any interview, any documentary, any carefully managed media appearance, said her name out loud. Not once. This daughter grew up knowing exactly who her biological mother was. She watched her on television. She watched her walk into the most famous buildings in the world. She watched her talk about compassion, about authenticity, about the importance of never abandoning the people you love. And she has never once heard her own name come out of that woman's mouth. Trevor Engelson was there when that silence began. He was the man who knew the version of Meghan Markle that the royal family was never supposed to meet. And when he finally decided the silence had gone on long enough, Prince Harry heard something about the woman he married that broke him in a way nothing had broken him since the night he lost his mother. Stay with me, because the daughter she never claimed is the reason everything changes now. If you have ever believed that the truth, no matter how carefully it has been buried, eventually finds its way to the surface, this channel was built for you. Subscribe now, because this story is still unfolding, and you will want to be here when the next chapter breaks. There is something about Trevor Engelson that the press has never fully understood. They called him Meghan's first husband, the man she left behind, the Hollywood producer who was replaced by a prince and then quietly forgotten by a media cycle that had already moved on to a bigger story. And Trevor let them think that because Trevor was doing something far more valuable than correcting the record. He was remembering. For years, while Meghan transformed from a cable television actress into a duchess, while the Netflix documentaries were filmed and the Oprah interview was broadcast, and the carefully constructed narrative of the silence victim was built piece by piece, Trevor showed up to his own life, built his career, started a family, said almost nothing publicly. But here is what that silence was protecting. Trevor Engelson is one of the very few people on earth who knew Meghan Markle before the reinvention, before the royal family, before the version of herself she has been performing for the world since the moment she stepped onto the global stage. He knew her in the years she now rarely discusses in detail. He knew her during the time when the foundation of what she would become was being quietly and deliberately constructed. And what he witnessed during those years, what he understood about the specific decisions she made long before Harry ever knew her name, is the information that no PR firm and no legal strategy has ever been able to fully reach because Trevor never signed a non-disclosure agreement. That single fact, overlooked for years, became the most important thing about him. To understand what Trevor revealed, you need to understand how their marriage actually ended, not the version that has been quietly allowed to fade into the background. The real one. Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle were married. He had been there for the years before Suits. He had used his connections to support her career during the time when the industry had not yet noticed her. He believed in a version of her that she was already beginning to leave behind. And then the role came, and everything changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, in the way that the most significant changes always happen. Quietly, beneath the surface, while the person watching is still trying to understand what they are seeing. Those who were close to the couple during this period describe a gradual but unmistakable shift. The circle began to change. Old connections were filtered out. New relationships with people who could offer access to a different world moved in. And then one morning, without warning, without a conversation, without a phone call, a FedEx envelope arrived at his door. Inside were not legal papers, not a letter, not an explanation. A wedding ring and an engagement ring returned without a word. Treated, as those who know him describe it, like a canceled subscription to something she no longer needed. That was the morning Trevor Engelson understood exactly who he had married. But the rings were not the deepest part of what he knew. Because during the years he had spent with her, during the time before the reinvention, Trevor had become aware of something that Meghan had been carrying long before she ever met him. A chapter of her life that existed before the Hollywood years, before Suits, before the carefully constructed public identity of the self-made woman who had always known exactly who she was. There had been a first marriage, a quiet one, far from the cameras that would later follow her everywhere. And from that marriage, according to sources with knowledge of that period, there had been a child, a daughter named Noelle. taken in by the Giuliano family in Chicago, and left behind, according to those who describe this period as deliberately and as efficiently as everything else that did not fit the story Meghan was building for herself. She didn't just want to be famous. She wanted to be iconic. And to be iconic, you have to have a clean past. You cannot be the authentic Duchess, the devoted modern mother, the empowered woman who speaks about never abandoning the people she loves if there's a daughter in Chicago who has grown up watching all of that on a television screen and never once heard her own name. Here is what nobody has connected until now. Because the FedEx envelope and the secret marriage and the daughter in Chicago, as significant as each of them is individually, are not the deepest part of this story. The deepest part is what Noelle's existence means for the woman who has spent years building an empire on the idea of authentic maternal love. Those who have spoken to people connected to the Giuliano family describe a young woman who carries a quiet and unmistakable resemblance to someone the world knows very well. The same presence, the same eyes, the same quality of attention in a room. Noelle grew up. She built a life. She started her own family, which means that the woman currently producing content about female empowerment and authentic modern motherhood is a grandmother. Not publicly, not by any acknowledgement, but biologically, by every measure that actually matters, a grandmother. And this is the moment everything changed. Not publicly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because when this information reached the people who were close to Harry, when the specific details of what Trevor had been carrying became known to the man who had given up everything to stand beside the woman at the center of this story, the reaction was not anger. It was something quieter than anger, and something far more devastating. Because by this point, Harry was no longer just processing a secret marriage or a hidden child. He was processing the specific and systematic erasure of an entire human being. A daughter who had existed all along, who had grown up watching her biological mother talk about the importance of compassion and authenticity and maternal love, who had never once been claimed. And the most chilling detail, the one that sources say Harry could not stop returning to, was the vision board. Multiple sources, including those connected to Trevor's circle, describe a board that existed during the years before the palace. A specific and deliberate document of ambition that included imagery connected to the British royal family, connected specifically to Prince Harry. She had not just found him by chance. She had studied him, his public statements about wanting a family, his visible grief over his mother, his deep and documented longing to belong to something that would not fracture. She saw all of that, and she saw not a person who needed protecting, but a platform that could never be taken away. And Harry, sitting with what Trevor had shared, understood something about his own story that no palace briefing and no Netflix documentary and no carefully managed media narrative had ever told him. He had not rescued someone who needed rescuing. He had been selected. But here is what nobody reporting this story has connected. Because Harry's realization in 2026, as significant as it is not the deepest part of what is happening here. The deepest part goes back to a woman he lost when he was 15 years old and a pattern he swore he would never miss again. Diana Spencer spent the final years of her life trying to tell the truth about what had been done to her. She found ways to make her voice heard. She gave the Panorama interview. She spoke to authors and journalists. She found the gaps in the wall that had been built around her, and she spoke through them. And every time she did, the institution absorbed it, managed it, moved the story on. Because institutions have something that individuals do not. Time, resources, and the ability to control which version of events becomes the one that people remember. Harry watched all of this happen as a child. He watched his mother fight to be believed inside a world that was not designed to receive her truth. He watched her be managed, contained, and ultimately reduced to a version of herself that served everyone's interests except her own. And he made a promise, the kind that 15-year-old boys make at funerals when the grief is too large to hold inside, that he would never let the same thing happen to someone he loved. That promise drove every decision he made after Diana died. It drove him toward Meghan. It drove him away from his family. It drove him across an ocean into a life he had not planned. because he believed with everything he had that he was doing what he had failed to do for his mother. He was protecting someone. The cruelest irony of 2026 is that Diana's own story was being used against her son. Not by an institution, not by a palace, by the woman he had crossed the world to defend. Diana was silenced by people who valued the institution over the person inside it. Meghan, according to what sources describe Trevor as having shared, had studied that silence. She had studied Harry's grief, his longing, his specific and documented need to save the people he loved from the kind of erasure that had taken his mother. And she had used every element of what she found. A man who wanted to protect someone from being silenced was given someone who knew exactly how to perform the role of the silenced woman. A man who had watched his mother be driven from the family that was supposed to love her was shown a woman who claimed the same family was driving her away. A man who had grown up feeling that he had failed to save his mother was offered the chance to save someone else. Harry understood this in 2026. Not with anger, with the specific and devastating clarity of someone who has finally seen the whole picture and recognized that they were in it from the very beginning. So what happens now? The legal situation is significant. Trevor Engelson never signed a non-disclosure agreement. This single fact, confirmed by those familiar with the timeline of their relationship, means there is no legal barrier preventing him from sharing what he knows about the years before the palace, about the specific things he witnessed, about the chapter of Meghan's life that preceded everything the world believes it knows about her. He can speak. He can write. He can share. And the response from those connected to Meghan's management when word spread that Trevor was prepared to be more forthcoming about what he knew was immediate. Those who have spoken to former staffers describe a reaction that was not calm, not strategic, not the measured response of someone confident in their own truth. It was the response of someone who had built everything on the assumption that a specific person would stay silent forever. And he had not. The frantic legal communications, the attempts to reach intermediaries, the crisis management machinery that has been activated so many times in recent years, all of it speaks a language that requires no translation. When you panic at the prospect of someone telling their own story, it is because their story is something worth panicking about. Meanwhile, those watching Harry closely in 2026 describe a man who is in the process of understanding something he spent years refusing to see. The reports of separate schedules, independent appearances, professional distance have moved from tabloid speculation to established patterns. Harry is described by those who know him as exhausted. Not by the press, not by the palace, by the weight of finally understanding something he spent years building his entire life around. And by the specific and irreversible knowledge that the daughter Meghan never claimed grew up, started a family, and is waiting in a life she built entirely without her biological mother for the silence to finally end. Here is what this story is really about. Not a secret marriage, not a hidden daughter, not a vision board or a FedEx envelope or a grandmother in Montecito who has never said her granddaughter's name. It is about a man who loved his mother deeply enough to spend his entire adult life trying to make sure no one else was ever treated the way she was. And it is about the moment he understood that the protection he offered, the titles he surrendered, the family he left, the country he gave up had been something that was planned for. Diana never received the truth she was owed from the people who owed it to her. She fought for it in every way available to her. And she paid for that fight with everything she had. Harry watched that happen. And now, in 2026, he is sitting with a truth of his own. That the woman he believed he was rescuing had studied the woman he spent his life trying to avenge and had learned exactly what to do with what she found. The daughter she never claimed is still out there, living a life that was built entirely without her, waiting, perhaps, for the silence to finally mean something. Trevor Engelson kept his silence for years. He is not keeping it anymore. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Not because we are asking, because the next chapter is already being written, and you will want to be here when it surfaces. We will be here. Make sure you are, too.